Hey guys, what's up? Welcome to another riveting episode of Pete's Ghias. And in this video, I'm going to show you how to re-index your rear torsion spring plates with the help of this simple, inexpensive tool. I know you're on the edge of your seat, so let's get right to it. Now, I don't have the special tool for raising and lowering the spring plate, but what I do have is this tool. It's a turnbuckle, it cost me about $10 from my local hardware store, versus spending about $60 on a specialty tool that I may never use again. It's just gonna collect dust on your shelf, and you have to pay for shipping, and it might not even be in stock. So if you're in a hurry and you're on a budget like most Volkswagen owners, this turnbuckle is actually perfect solution to doing the job, so let me show you how it's done. I'm going to take this cover off so I can inspect the rubber bushings. There's an inner and outer bushing, and I want to check the angle on the spring plate to make sure it isn't sagging. Okay, so I got my 15mm socket here. I'm going to start loosening these up one by one. They're actually pretty loose. Now this swing arm is held on here with some force, so when it pops off, if it pops off, which I don't really want it to do, it's gonna come off suddenly and jump down. And what you don't want to do is put any of your body parts underneath there, your hands, your arms, your legs, because you could really get hurt badly. Okay, so after I remove this cover plate, there's really nothing holding this. Oh my God, it's missing a bushing. So that is curious. So now that the cover is off, what I want to do is put some marks on here so that when I take it off, I'll know where my starting position was. I make two marks, one for the spring plate to the frame and one for the spring plate to the torsion bar. Now I've seen other people try to raise or lower the spring plate using floor jack, but the problem is I don't have a body on this and I don't have a motor or a transaxle, so when I lift it up with the jack, it literally lifts up the entire floor pan. I can also try wiggling this off, but just makes the whole thing wiggle. So floor jack is really not going to work. There's a few ways to attach the turnbuckle, but only one way that's worked for me. You want to make sure the spring plate flexes outwards as you raise it up. Otherwise, you won't get it off the bump stop. So what I've done is I've threaded this bolt that's about 5 or 6 inches long through the hole where you would mount the shock absorber. And I use the shock absorber bolt and nut to attach the turnbuckle to the bottom of the spring plate. So as I start to twist this, it's going to raise the spring plate up, and it's also going to give it an outward twist. So again, safety is a priority. I want to keep my body parts out from underneath here. Okay, so if you take a closer look here, you can see that the spring plate is off the suspension stop. So I'm gonna keep on rotating this and lifting this off, and then I'm gonna lower it down. All right, I have this screwdriver. I put a piece of tape on it, so hopefully that won't mar the finish, and I'm going to wedge this in here and try to lower this off the stop. Okay, as I'm lowering this, it's coming off the stop slowly and controlled. Okay, the tension has been released. I can pull this screwdriver out, take this off. This has been lowered. Feels as though it's not completely off, however. That is because it is still wedged inside there. So that's where my big hammer comes in. Okay, it appears to be off. And you can see that it moved positions about 1/4 of an inch, but you'll also see that the spring plate and torsion bar have not moved because they're still connected to each other. So I will mark the second position here. So this is the first position, so I'll leave that on the left. So that's basically where we stand. So the next step is to measure this angle. It should be 17.5. Manual says that I should check and set my zero angle on the door sill. Now obviously I have no door sill. I could use the outer lip of the floor pan here, but it's actually not entirely straight because this pan was picked up with a forklift at some point, and so there are some ripples in the edge there. So what I'm going to do is set my angle finder on the edge of the tunnel, and I'm going to zero this out, and that will be my zero reference point. Okay, so this reads 17. Should be 17.5, although this is pretty darn close. So what I want to do is adjust this so this points down by half a degree. So this is the torsion bar inside this ring. There's 40 splines on the inner side and 44 splines on the outer side. You can change the angle by half a degree or 0.5 degrees by rotating in opposite directions. So if I adjust the outside down by 1 and the inner up by 1, I've changed the angle downwards by 0.5 degrees. You always adjust the inner and outer rotation together so you can make incremental changes to the angle. If you're confused, read your owner's manual. Okay, here goes nothing. Wiggle that right off. Let me take this off. Wow, look how dirty this thing is. Holy cow. I've never seen a torsion housing this dirty before. This is absolutely terrible. So I'm going to clean this up. I'm going to grease the inner end. And I also think I'm going to give the inside of this a coat of paint. It's too late to powder coat it. I'm done with that. I give the inside a light sanding, 2 coats of paint, and give it some time to cure. The junk inside here is a combination of blaster media and desert sand, as this car came from California. I think I've removed about 95% of the dirt. It's not going to get any better without shooting a fire hose inside there, so I'm moving on. Yeah, I still can't get over the fact that there was only one bushing installed here, and it's all cracked and dried out and no good. So the weird things you find that the previous owners have done in the cars really can blow your mind sometimes. So now I'm ready to move on. I've got new bushings to install here. So I'm going to show you how this is done. So this is the torsion bar. This is what actually does all the work. This sits inside this housing here, and there's like some tooth gears on the inside where this locks in place. And the basic idea is that this end will twist up and down as the wheel moves up and down while the car is driving. And this end is fixed in position inside the tube here. And this part twists as the suspension travels up and down. I've got some Sharpie marks on the end here that you probably can't see. And so the outer spline is lined up to where it was. Set it up back here again. And I'm just going to get an approximation of where it was. So this second mark on the right is where this thing was when I took the cover plate off and when I dropped the spring plate down. So my goal here is to adjust the angle on this spring plate to 17.5 degrees. And doing this requires a lot of trial and error. It can be difficult, it can be frustrating, it can be time consuming, but you just have to be patient and take your time, and eventually you're going to get it right. So if I set my angle finder on here, it's at 16.9 degrees. So in order to get this to 17.5, take this off, and I'm going to pull this torsion bar out ever so slightly, just enough that I can feel it on the inner end, because I obviously can't see it. But when I feel it come out of the inner housing, just ever so slightly, I'm going to twist it by 1 and push it back inside. Okay, here it comes. Pulling out very gently, And because it's been lubricated, it comes out easily. And I can just feel it pop out right about now. There. And push it back in. Okay. I'm going to put the spring plate back on. This might be a bit off when I put it on. Let's see what happens. Put my angle finder back here. Okay, so when I set my angle finder on here, 17.7. This is with the spring plate hanging. If I lift up the tension slightly, 17.3. Then back down to 17.65. 17.7. So somewhere in the middle there is 17.5. That's about as close as I'm gonna get, and I'm very happy with the position it's in right now. Here's where things are gonna get a little confusing. All of these bushings basically look the same, but they're actually different. There's two different part numbers. Part number 311-511-245 is going to have a single dot on the edge. And this one goes on the left outer or the right inner. Part number 311-511-246 has a double dot on the edge. And this goes on the left inner or the right outer. Okay, so depending on whether or not you buy German or Brazilian bushings, you're gonna see one of two words printed at the top. This one says acima, which means above, or you're gonna see the word oben, O-B-E-N, and that also means above. And the reason it's printed here is so that you make sure that you orient the bushing with this word on top, so that the thinner part of the bushing rests on the bottom and the thicker part of the bushing will be on the top. Okay, now I'm gonna point out how these things fit against each other. You could fit it like this, you could fit it like this, you could fit it like this, but there's only one correct way. If you'll notice that these sides are slightly beveled, these are going to face each other when it's installed. The outer bushing on the left has the single dot, that's the part number ending in 5. Will fit into the torsion cover, and it'll only really fit in one way. You can try to spin it in a million different directions, but it will only fit in like this. And when it's installed in the car, this is the orientation. And the opposite bushing, see again, that's the beveled edge and the beveled edge here, will fit against each other like this. So make sure that you have yours oriented the correct way. Putting this back together is a little tricky because the new bushings are extremely tight-fitting. So I'm going to demo the method that works best for me. That involves making a bunch of marks and partially taking it apart. First, I'm adding a new vertical mark that will be my reference point to orient the new inner bushing, and a new mark for the spring plate to the torsion bar. The spring plate comes off, but the torsion bar stays in place. Don't remove it or you'll have to start the entire process over again. I'm now putting my bushing in place and adding another vertical mark on the top that I will use to orient the bushing to the spring plate. So again, the reason for all this is it's too hard to squeeze the spring plate in if the bushing is already in place. So instead, I'm going to put the bushing on the spring plate first and install both together. I'm lubricating the bushing with a healthy dose of talcum powder so it doesn't squeak once the car is back on the road, because that would just be embarrassing. Now I'm lining up the two marks I made and squeezing the bushing onto the spring plate. You can see in this shot how tight a fit it is. I'm pushing everything into place now, and it's a bit of a struggle. And I need to make sure I'm lining up my two marks, the spring plate to the torsion bar. I drive it in with a rubber hammer. Get some talc on the outer bushing and place it into the cover. To get the cover and bushing on, the stock length bolts won't reach because the cover is sticking too far out. So I need to use two long temporary bolts to reach in and compress everything down. The last guy who was messing around in here probably didn't know that, and that's why he left the outer bushing off. I need the turnbuckle again to raise the spring plate. I bolt in the same way on top, but this time use the middle opening on the spring plate. This will make it curve inwards as it rises. I'm now tightening the long bolts all the way in to compress the end of the spring plate and bushings into place. Now I bolt in 2 stock length bolts. I then remove the 2 temporary long bolts and replace them with the other 2 stock length bolts. Wipe the talcum powder mess off and remove the turnbuckle. Now maybe the most important step, I need to inspect my work. This spring plate, it's sitting right on the edge of the suspension stop. There's a possibility that when I tightened the cover on here, it didn't draw the spring plate onto the torsion bar 100%. And so to be safe and to make sure I've done this right, I've decided to remove the cover and take a look underneath. Okay, as I feared, the spring plate is sticking out about a 1/4 inch from the end of the torsion bar. So I have to fix that. I reattached the turnbuckle, but put it behind the spring plate and on the bottom, so it gives it an inward bend as it lifts up. I raised the spring plate and it curved inward, so now it's backwards. It started out on the edge, now it's moved back about a 1/4 inch inward so that it's clearing the suspension stop. So now all I need to do is fix this. I need to force the end of this housing of the spring plate onto the torsion bar. And I'm gonna do that with a heavy weight. Now what I really need is like a 10-pound hammer, which I don't have right now, but what I do have is this weight. Oh yeah, this is 15 pounds. And I'm basically gonna just bang this in. I'm gonna put this old glove on top. Now, this is not necessarily the most professional thing, but I'm not a professional, so that's my excuse. Now that this is in all the way, I'm gonna lower the spring arm one last time. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, the spring arm is in all the way, and it's sitting on the suspension stop. It's inside where it should be, and it looks good, and I'm happy with it now. And the final step, torquing everything down to 25. Some manuals will tell you to torque these bolts down to 80. That is a mistake. There's a misprint in the book. If you torque these down to 80, you will snap the head off the bolt. So that's how it's done. Now I move on to the passenger side. I would definitely recommend taking apart one side at a time. The reason is, on the pan, the inner housing for the torsion bars is hollow. If you take both bars out at the same time, you run the risk of pushing one in too far. If you do that, you might have trouble aligning the opposite side. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and I'll leave you with this final message. If you like going slow and going slow in style while spending a ton of money, you should get yourself a Karmann Ghia.